Good morning. It's a beautiful day in the park here in Whittier. I'm recording this video for a friend who sent me a YouTube video this week called Israel, Hamas, and the End Times. And it kind of made me angry at first because I knew what was coming. But then it kind of made me laugh because I haven't been sent a video like that in so long. I did watch it. It was like 45 minutes long. I watched it on double time because you could still hear what was going on, but I didn't have to sit through it. But I was gonna just like write my friend back kind of some thoughts, and then it turned into like a little more than thoughts. And then I realized that so many of my friends are going through these same discussions with their religious communities or their parents or people around them. And so I thought, like, maybe other people would be interested in hearing my thoughts about Israel and the end of the world. So yeah, I might get vulnerability hangover later and delete this, but I don't know, we'll see. Okay, so I started to type out my answers to you in an email, and then I didn't want to send them because I know how emails can seem like super reactionary and you can't understand tone and things like that. So I thought I would, I printed out my email and thought I would sort of read it to you. So I think you know that I consider myself a Christian and an anarchist. I don't always know where one begins and the other ends, but I do believe that anarchism came as a result of Jesus's teachings. So like when Jesus says to his disciples, the Romans lord their power over one another, we're not going to do it that way. Or the temptation in the desert, he says, Satan offers him power over all the kingdoms of the world, and Jesus turns it down. And funny enough, in 2025, evangelicals have power over the United States in a way that they never have. Like, we've had evangelical presidents, we had Jimmy Carter, we had George W. Bush, but Donald Trump has people praying in tongues in the Oval Office and worship services. There's a former Biola student currently working in the White House. So evangelicals are in power in a way that they never have been, which does beg the question, right? And I've heard people say this, like, have they accepted that temptation of the desert, power over the world? They have it. So, and so that's also why, like, I think it's interesting that, the United States bombs Iran, and then Christians in America say, oh, see, here comes the end times. And it's like, well, evangelical Christians bombed Iran, and now you're going to claim that that's a sign of the end times. It's a chicken and the egg type situation. It's I don't know. It's just strange to me the way things are kind of playing out right now. Even though I'm an anarchist, I do say the phrase Jesus is Lord. I think you know that I believe that. But I also understand that to first century Christians, Jesus is Lord was poking fun at the phrase Caesar is Lord, which was very common. And Caesar destroyed Jesus on the cross, right? Absolutely destroyed his body and spirit on the cross and killed many, many Christians. And so for a Christian to say Jesus is Lord is kind of a wink at the powers of this world, saying the one you crucify is actually the one who we believe has the answers and has salvation for us. When it comes to exegesis and reading the Old Testament or reading the Gospels, a professor told us at Azusa, the simplest answer is probably the best answer. So when you read a prophet and they're talking about Gog and Magog, they're talking about Gog and Magog. They're not talking about Turkey. They're not talking about Iran. They're not talking about Russia. In my lifetime, the Antichrist has been Gorbachev, Gaddafi, Castro, Obama, and now Donald Trump. Or, it's just every season of life seems to come with this new, here comes the end times. And I actually think this is what Jesus was talking about when he goes to his disciples and he says, don't be led astray. There's going to be wars and there's going to be earthquakes, and this is the world unfolding. He calls them birth pangs. Like, this is a new world unfolding before you, but don't be led astray by that, or by people who say, look, here it comes. Funny enough, evangelicals now are the ones who are like, well, we have wars in the Middle East and we have earthquakes, and so therefore here comes the end of the world, here comes the rapture, here comes the end times. And I think Jesus is saying quite the opposite of that. He's saying, don't freak out. I mean, the people who wrote that down, Jesus, who knows if the person Jesus actually said that phrase, but the people who wrote it down were writing about the destruction of the temple by the Romans. And for them, that literally is, like, the destruction of the Jewish temple in the first century is the end of the world for Jewish people. And so Christians at that point are saying, don't be led astray. Like, Jesus is still Lord, even in suffering, even during war, even when there's an earthquake. Don't let somebody come along and tell you the end of the world is coming. So I think it's hard to read stuff that's 3,000 or 4,000 years old without knowing context, without reading Hebrew and Greek, which I obviously don't. When somebody says to me, I read the Bible every day, that doesn't tell me a lot about them, because they're not saying I look for Christ every day. They're not saying I pray through the Sermon on the Mount every day. They're just saying they read the Bible, and of course they're bringing whatever background they have with it, right? They could be of any political affiliation, any nationalist affiliation, and then reading the Bible through that lens and kind of making up what they want. And I think the pastor in your video is kind of seeing signs in tea leaves. He wants to be able to explain what's going on in the world, as he feels it's his job to do. But he's really not doing anything different than, I think, me opening the newspaper and reading a horoscope and saying, oh yeah, that's obviously right. Just sort of back channeling meaning into something. Funny enough, there's this theologian who wrote a whole book on, he said the most important thing Christians could do now is take the Bible away from Americans who believe that they can just read it and then give it meaning without going through some process of discipleship. And I love that idea, because again, like a Zen monk doesn't just go into the temple and start writing haiku and giving advice to people. They have to go through a process. They have to go on the journey. They renounce their possessions. They shave their head. They go under the tutelage of a master, right? And then they become enlightened, right? And I think that's what discipleship is supposed to be, where you follow the teachings, and you learn how to read before you get to say what something means. So that's why it was kind of funny in the video when the pastor was like, he put up this picture of Charlie Day, who's an actor, and the scene of all these red lines and conspiracy theories on the wall, and he's kind of wigged out looking at it, and he says, sometimes when I talk about the end times, this is how I feel. And I really think that's what he's doing. I think that's what all the pastors who I grew up under, who were talking about the mark of the beast and the Antichrist and the who is the beast that rises up out of the seven-headed dragon that rises up out of the ocean, and the whore of Babylon, and all those different things, that is first century imagery that was written to critique empire and to give hope to people who were being crushed under empire. And I love John's revelation, especially as an anarchist, because at the end, when Jesus' return at the end of the book, Jesus is wearing the clothes of the martyrs. He's not on the side of empire. He's not the president. He's not a king. He's the crucified one, and he's got the blood of martyrs on his clothes. He's wearing the dress of the martyr. And so that to me is such a beautiful point in the book of Revelation that I think people miss that point. I have in my life felt betrayed before by friends, by coworkers, by people I've dated, but that betrayal has never been more real than I think from being raised in Christianity. And I know I have a lot of friends who feel this way. You're raised in Christianity. You're taught to say that Jesus is Lord. You are, you're told that you can't just be a Christian by going to church, or you can't become a car by sitting in the garage, was kind of the famous way to say that. But that you have to actually bear fruit of Christ, bear the fruit of the Spirit, love and joy and peacemaking and understanding, patience. So sort of like being given that, and then now at 40 years old, I'm being told by Christians that I should accept Donald Trump as some great victory for Christianity, or some sort of like Christian leader. And I just can't accept that. And I certainly can't accept that. And I don't want to. I just told you I'm an anarchist, so I don't want to compare Democrats and Republicans. I am no fan of Biden, Obama. I loathe Nancy Pelosi. I think she's a terrible person, and it's just that, again, that is all just empire talk, and I'm not that interested. I'm interested in the teachings of Jesus, and like really trying to figure out what it means that God is love and how I should now live. If empire is not gonna, if I'm not gonna let empire dictate what I believe is good and evil, but I'm going to let the crucified Jesus sort of dictate my way, then I think it just means I have to live differently and see things differently, certainly than an American president would try to get me to see. And that includes the modern day nation state of Israel. I don't see why I have to read the Bible where it talks about God's chosen people, the Jews, and then also connect that to 2025 Christian Zionism and the nation of Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu. Funny, in your video, the pastor talked about beheaded babies on October 7th. And that is, I don't know how old that video is, but that has like been debunked time and time again as a sort of piece of Netanyahu's propaganda that oh, they beheaded the babies. Yes, children died on October 7th. More than 1,000 Israeli citizens died. And I think that is, I don't celebrate or champion those deaths. I just think it's what happens when you have an apartheid regime like Israel, when you keep Palestinians in, second, third, fourth class citizenship, the Nakba, the catastrophe of Israel's treatment of Palestinian people. And funny enough, like obviously when you talk about Palestine, you're talking about some of the oldest Christian communities in the world. So if we're going to go back to the talk of Christian martyrs, I don't think this should be the only thing we consider when we sort of look at world events, that whether or not Christians are being affected, but they certainly are in Palestine. The oldest Christian communities in Palestine, like some of the oldest Christian churches in Palestine, have been destroyed, bombed, along with hospitals, schools, journalists, children. And I don't know where you get your news these days, but I have so many horrific images of dismembered and dead children, or children crying out for their dead parents as a result of Netanyahu's war in Israel. So, like where Karl Barth says, God's, in the resurrection, God's yes to Jesus is God's no to the powers of the world. So God says yes to Jesus, yes to the crucified, no to the powers of the world. And so I would say no to Rome, no to America's wars, no to Christian Zionism or Israeli Zionism, and no to the suffering that empires cause. But I think the pastor in your video and what I think you do is you try to make meaning of shitty situations, and I think that's only natural. Jesus on the cross says, "God, why have you forsaken me? Like, why aren't you rescuing me?" And I think we have to accept that God's silence is part of the mystery, while doing the things that Christ calls us to do. Again, this is why Jesus says, don't be led astray by people who try and make meaning of suffering. And our friend Jan Brown, before she passed away from cancer, sat in front of our church and said, don't let anybody tell you that my cancer was part of some plan. It's not. It's sad. And she was dying, and I would say the same of suffering in the world. It's not part of some end times scheme. Whether or not I believe in the end of the world, that's a totally other question. And I don't believe in a traditional second coming of Jesus. I believe in the constant flow of Christ out of the Trinity and into the world all the time. So it's not a second coming of Jesus. It is the never-ending coming of Jesus, in love and in suffering. And this is why, I don't, funny enough, the thing, the verses that get interpreted as the rapture, this one-time event where we, Christians disappear, there's one or two verses that people use, and they sort of build this whole scenario around it. But there are hundreds and hundreds of verses about taking care of immigrants, taking care of widows and orphans. And what is the evangelical president doing right now but cutting Medicaid, cutting Meals on Wheels, ending a government suicide hotline for LGBTQ teens because it's too woke or whatever. I don't accept that as Christianity or God's love. I think that's why people say there is no hate like Christian love, because so many Christians right now are pimping Donald Trump, and it's destruction for so many, and it's pain for so many people. So I continue on as a follower of Jesus, as an anarchist, celebrating God's yes to the crucified and God's no to the powers of this world. So thanks for listening. I love you, and I'll see you Friday. See you later.